How the next Kawhi Leonard failed in the NBA. After a ton of hype going into the NBA drafts, Stanley Johnson's overall career thus far has been relatively disappointing. And after being compared to guys like Kawhi Leonard and other players that had similar skill sets, those comparisons have certainly not come to fruition. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports, I make opinionative NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Stanley Johnson was drafted with the number 8 overall selection all the way back in the 2015 NBA draft. And going into that year's draft, Stanley was seen as a player offensively that was somewhat limited, of course had the ability to hit an occasional catch and shoot 3-point jump shot and maybe create for himself a little bit, but he was more so seen as a limited player offensively. But the real appeal of Stanley's game was his defensive ability. Stanley had a lot of physical gifts that you see in a lot of great individual defenders in terms of the size. He's 6'7", which is in the ideal range. He was also a relatively strong guy, which would of course help you defensively. He also had a pretty nice wingspan, he moved his feet pretty well, and even besides his physical gifts, he also had phenomenal instincts. He had great hands to get those poke steals, and overall Stanley Johnson was just seen as a phenomenal defender in college that would translate very well once making it to the NBA level. But once Stanley actually got to the NBA, early on it was pretty clear that his defense was translating very well to the NBA level, and he was doing a phenomenal job at playing great individual defense on the opposing team's best player most nights. But even besides his great individual defense, Stanley was also doing a really nice job at playing great team defense, playing the passing lanes very well, getting those poke steals in the lane. And overall, it was pretty clear in his rookie season that Stanley Johnson was a phenomenal defender, even at the NBA level. But in terms of his offensive ability in his rookie season, as I mentioned, he was relatively raw offensively. But when you look at the numbers that he put up, based upon the expectations that people had for him going into the NBA, his rookie campaign was a pretty successful one. In his rookie year, Stanley averaged 8 points per game on 37% shooting from the field, 4.2 rebounds, and 1.6 assists on 23 minutes per game as well. And the reason why I say his rookie season was relatively successful was due to the fact that he was proving he was a really good defender even at the NBA level. And going into the NBA draft, people already knew that he was relatively raw offensively anyway, so the fact that he wasn't averaging more than 8 points per game in his rookie season wasn't necessarily seen as a concern for most people. And the real hope for Stanley Johnson after his rookie season was he would look to work on a specific aspect of his offensive game during each and every offseason. For example, maybe the first offseason he would look to work on his 3-point jump shot, and maybe the season after that he would look to work on his driving and finishing ability, the season after that his ball handling ability, and just continue to work on each aspect of his offensive game, which is exactly what a guy in Kawhi Leonard did over the years. Because originally when Kawhi got drafted, he was also seen as a phenomenal defender, but he was pretty raw offensively, but he was able to improve certain aspects of his offensive game each and every offseason, and eventually he got to the point where he's at today, where he's a phenomenal offensive player combined with being a phenomenal defender, thus making him one of the better players in the NBA at this point. And people were hoping that Stanley could see similar improvements to what Kawhi was able to see over the years. People weren't necessarily expecting Stanley to get to a superstar type level that Kawhi's at currently, but people were hoping that Stanley could eventually get to the point where he was a borderline all-star type player, or maybe even an all-star type guy. But unfortunately for Stanley, he saw a little bit of a regression in his second season. In his second year, his numbers went down across the board, averaging around 4.4 points per game on 35% shooting from the field, 2.5 rebounds per game, and 1.4 assists. Now, one thing that I will say is his minutes per game did get cut from 23 minutes per game in his rookie season to around 18 minutes per game in his second season, but either way, his second season was certainly a disappointment, because not only did Stanley not improve offensively, he actually got a little bit worse. And at that point, certain fans were starting to get a little bit concerned with Stanley Johnson and if he would be a great player in the NBA or not. But at the same time, other fans were still pretty confident in Stanley based upon the fact that he was still a really young player and he still was showing some flashes. And in Stanley's third season, he brought his numbers up across the board to around where they were in his rookie year, averaging around 8.7 points per game on 37% shooting from the field, 3 3.7 rebounds, and 1.6 assists, which was nice to see that he brought his numbers right back up, but at the same time, he wasn't showing all that much improvement offensively, which was starting to be a concern and was starting to be a trend for the rest of his career. And after showing a lack of improvement offensively after 4 years, the Pistons ended up moving on from him, and he moved on to the New Orleans Pelicans for around half a season, putting up similar numbers to what he put up in Detroit. Then he moved on to the Toronto Raptors for a little bit, where he was just a situational player, and more recently he signed with the Los Angeles Lakers, where he certainly was showing some nice flashes, but at the same time, he of course was nowhere near the expectations that he had going into the NBA draft. And that's kind of where Stanley is at this point in his career. He's still a phenomenal defender, which is great to see, but offensively, he's still somewhat raw. I would say he's able to do a lot of different things offensively, which is good, like spread the floor out and hit an occasional catch and shoot 3-point jump shot. He also has an ability to hit a pull-up mid-range jump shot, also having the ability to drive all the way to the basket and posterize players at certain times, but mostly just finish around them with crafty layups. Also having a decent understanding of NBA offenses, and in turn is a decent passer and playmaker for his size and position, but he doesn't necessarily do anything at a very good or an elite level, and I think that's probably the biggest downfall of Stanley Johnson. Because I think, for example, if Stanley was able to hit a catch and shoot 3-point jump shot very consistently, he would be seen as a much more valuable player than he is at currently. And of course, he still is relatively young in the NBA, and of course, he still could improve as the seasons do progress, but I think at this point, we basically know who Stanley Johnson is. But by the way, that's certainly not a bad thing. Every team in the NBA could always use a phenomenal defender like Stanley is, who also has some abilities offensively. So I think he's going to get plenty of opportunities going forward. If that means he's going to stay with the Lakers long term, or it means he's going to move on to a different team or a few different teams, whatever it is, I still do think Stanley will get an opportunity and plenty of opportunities going forward in the NBA. And that's basically the story of how the next Kawhi Leonard failed in the NBA. And the only reason why I say failed is because of course he didn't live up to the expectations he had on draft day, and of course he's nowhere near the level of Kawhi Leonard, but at the same time, Stanley did build a decent career for himself and still is playing to this point and still is providing value for NBA teams, which, as I mentioned, I think he's going to get a ton of opportunities going forward as well. So I don't necessarily want to say his NBA career is a failure. I just think the expectations that he had going into the NBA certainly have not been met, and he's certainly nowhere near the level of Kawhi Leonard. So in that sense, that part is a failure, of course. But we'll see what happens for Stanley Johnson going forward. Maybe he is able to improve certain aspects of his game and turn into a much more valuable player than he is at currently, or if not, he still does provide value to teams, so I don't think he's going to be out of the NBA all that soon. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Stanley Johnson was a failure in the NBA, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.